any genetic test sometimes for less than $10, or we're getting to a point where you have, a reasonable coverage of your genome covered for, about $100, and then having a full genome done as well, for way, way lower than what it was at in 20 years ago. So I think that is probably the biggest reason why we're seeing a huge increase in terms of what people can do with genomics. And the other, of course, is the fact that pandemics really accelerate, the cause, because I think it sort of forces people to think in all the terms that I talked about, whether it is affordability, whether it's in terms of access and others, because now it's not for, a small section of the population, but it is for everybody. And a point in that area, of course, is the fact that when most of you would have heard of the testing, the RT-PCR testing, what used to be at least 5,000 rupees is now currently coming down almost by 10 times. So I think that sort of changes the dynamics of who can access technologies like this. But for us, I think when I look at why I got into creating something like Map My Genome, I was in this space for a long time, but I found that there was a very the amount of data for some populations was very large when it came to genomics, but yet for a large population like India and Indians, I think we found that there was a very small percentage of data that was available. So for me, I think that became one of the points that, wanted to make sure that, if 1 out of 6 people in the world is Indian, then we should have a proportionate amount of data points available for the world. And I think that's where Map My Genome was started, that we were able to, at least assimilate a lot more on the Indian genome side, and be able to make sure that we can take all the different complexities that exist for the Indian genome and be able to make a better prediction for the average Indian consumer. So over the last 20 years, when I first started my first company, which was Ossimum Bio, we ended up acquiring 3 companies outside of India mostly. We became a leading genomics company, one of the largest genomic services companies worldwide, worked with most of the large pharmaceutical and biotech companies. But one of the points in that whole journey was the fact that, one of the assets that we had was a database, and that database was used for creating drugs for, large pharmaceutical companies. And when you look at drugs and you look at how most of these drugs were now being looked upon for seeing if they were suitable for certain populations, one of the things we found was that there are very few data points that were existing for Indians. And I think that was sort of the trigger for me to be able to say that, can we do something so that we can really bridge that inequality that exists? And therefore started Map My Genome in about 7 years ago. And Genome Patri did become the most popular brand that we have. But of course, we do many other kinds of genomic testing as well. Now, when you, I'm assuming many of you are students of in bioinformatics, or at least I'm hoping most of you also understand a lot of what you do in terms of in genomics. But there are 3 main aspects. I think everybody's heard about RT-PCR now. But there are other forms of trying to assess genetics. And then one of the areas would be things like looking at genotyping platforms, where you're looking at a microarray with very large number of data points to be able to find out if you have certain markers or not. And that would be what we are looking at in products like Genome Patri or Genome Patri Immunity or Medicamap and so on. But there are also other things that you would have heard, that when someone is trying to diagnose something and you're trying to find out if there is, you want to sequence the entire genome, or you want to make sure that you can sequence a part of the genome so you can find if there are certain complex diseases, then you would look at things like your exome sequencing or whole genome sequencing or a targeted sequencing. So these are slightly different technologies, but you're still looking at different parts of your DNA. And then of course you also have expression profiling and other things that you can do. So this is what we would do. But I think, just to give you all a sense of how this whole journey has been, So we started off in 2013 and we looked at, a very common sort of set of conditions, which were about 30 to 40 conditions in 2013. Today, I think that whole Genome Patri series covers more than 200 conditions and it's constantly increasing. But it's also become a very useful tool for COVID. And I'll explain to you a little bit about how that was so. And the product that we came out with over there was a product called Genome Patri Immunity, where we looked at the data that was there and we were able to get people to understand their own immunity as well as risk. One of the other fun things, and I think a lot of people do enjoy that, and that's how actually genomics became very popular, was looking at ancestry. You want to find out if you are 30% East Indian or West Indian, or if you have a little bit of European ancestry or African and so on. So I think that's another thing that you can do when you're looking at genomics data. And of course, you also can find out if there are some drugs that would work for you, which means that whether that drug is going to be efficacious for you, but also to be able to look and to see if that drug is likely to actually have an adverse reaction for you. So if you are looking at taking a medicine for, let's say, getting sick for COVID or anything else, I think one of the things that you might want to look at is the fact that whether this drug is not going to produce something that is going to be, not right in terms of the adverse reaction it can produce, but also whether this is going to be the right kind of dosage for you or not. So this is an example of what you can see in a genomic report. And over here, you can see that there are a few things that might be of interest. One is that you can look at certain traits. And by traits, I mean things like your vitamin, your allergies, your cholesterol, alcoholism, whether you're likely to have a high risk for alcoholism or not, obesity and other fun things. And then when you look at it from a disease perspective, you find some interesting terms like your ALTR, or a population risk, as well as your risk. And basically what you're looking at over here is to be able to find out if, compared to the population that you are, whether you are at a higher or a lower risk based on that. So for instance, I think if you look at type 2 diabetes, right, you would have heard most of you, somebody or the other would have had diabetes in your family. And I think one of the things that you can do over here is to be able to see if you have a higher risk or a lower risk from a genetic perspective, and then give them advice in terms of what they can do to reduce that overall risk that is there for them to be able to see that whether, if they change their diet and exercise, would that have an effect on the overall outcome that is there. So I think we were going along fine for many years. And then early this year, I think COVID came along. And this was, I think, around January, February, that we started to understand that there was this thing that was slowly becoming a pandemic. And then on March 22nd, there was a lockdown that was announced, and we all had to work from home. One of the first things that we then decided to do was to come up with what we call as a risk and immunity report for all our customers. And what we meant by that was to be able to say, what are the different aspects that would affect, someone likely to get COVID or someone who has COVID in terms of how they would react. So we came up with that. But the other thing that at least I got involved with was with several state governments on testing protocols as well as projects. And there is one large project that we completed that was with the state of Karnataka. And that was a seroprevalence study where we did both RT-PCR, we did antibody testing and so on. And we did it across the state to estimate and do a research study to see if there was, how many people were already infected by this virus. And as a result, to be able to help the government in making better policies in terms of vaccination and other things. The other thing, and probably the more important thing that we also did was that given our experience in this space, we realized that it was important to educate the average consumer, and by average consumer meant that people who had never studied biology ever in their life. And we came up with a lot of blogs studying from what is a virus to all the way to what are antibodies, to what is for specific diseases and so on. And at the same time, I think also we decided to come up with a COVID testing lab at our current premises. Oops, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay. So while we were doing our personal genomics and all, we started the first COVID testing lab. And today, I think we've also created a lab at the Hyderabad airport to screen arriving and departing passengers, so that you can actually make sure that anybody who's coming in with probably a different mutation can also be, we can also make sure that anybody who's coming in from outside can be screened so that the infection doesn't spread. So I mentioned that we were doing a lot of, there was something known as the genome per 3 immunity. So what were we really doing in that? I think basically we were looking at things like your previous SARS susceptibility. We were also looking at things like cytokine storm that you might have heard about, which is where your own immune system goes into a hyperdrive and starts to really work against you. And then things like comorbidities. You would have heard that people with type 2 diabetes or hypertension and others are likely to have a worse outcome as opposed to somebody who is relatively healthy. And then there are nutrients like your zinc, your vitamins, and others that have an effect on the overall outcome, as well as because there is no specific drug yet, whether these drugs are likely to work for you or not, whether these drugs will likely to have an adverse reaction or not. So anybody who has questions, please feel free to put it down in the chat. I'll be happy to look at it. Or if there is anybody else who wants to come up, I'll be happy to, please feel free to interrupt me and ask. But this is an example of what you can look at. You would look at things like your sleep, iron deficiency, your severity in terms of your ACE2 receptors. You look at hypertension, type 2 diabetes, certain kinds of drugs like your ibuprofen, chloroquine, abacavir, vitamin levels, and so on. So these are the different kinds of things that you can look at in terms of assessing the risk as well as your immunity, and then have a lifestyle plan that revolves around this. Now, I'm sure that many of you have probably already know a lot about testing, but there are many different forms of testing. And I thought it might be helpful to just go over a little bit of what we are doing, what you can do when you're looking at the testing for antibody tests for the virus and otherwise, right? So one is to be able to find the specific antigen, which means you're trying to find the virus that is there. And for that, the most popular one that is used is what is called the RT-PCR, where you're basically looking at a lot of amplifying that region of the virus and then being able to find that based on the target that you have put into the sequence, right? So that is the RT-PCR. Then there is also what we call as the LAMP, which is loop-mediated isothermal amplification. And this is actually a simplification of what you might do in RT-PCR. And here you don't need to use complicated equipment and do too much of what you do is in terms of your changing your temperature from low to high and so on. And this is easier to be able to do it. And you'd find that there are a few companies, for instance, there was one in Kerala that has a LAMP-based test. And there have been others that have been there for other diseases as well. You also heard about the CRISPR test that is there, which also looks at the virus presence. And these are basically sometimes a paper-based or otherwise, where you're using CRISPR to be able to find the virus also. Then there are other rapid antigen tests that you find that you can basically put in a small strip and you will immediately get a result. Of course, there are lots of issues around sensitivity of these tests as well. But then there are the ones that are probably what I believe we'll start seeing more in the future are a point of care based tests like the one that Abbott has, where you can, within 3 minutes or 5 minutes, you can find out if you're COVID positive or not, and up to 11 or 12 minutes if you're negative. So these are all kind of tests that are basically looking for antigens. And then the second set of tests that you do are where you're looking at antibodies, which means that you're looking to see if the virus was ever present in, in that person. So you basically do a test to find out if they have the antibodies for it. And then, of course, there are newer versions or newer ways of looking at immunity, which could also include things like your T-cell immunity and others, which I won't get into right now. And then there are the medical tests like your CT scans and blood tests where you can assess the infection risk, infection spread, as well as the respiratory system functionality and so on. So this is what you do in a RT-PCR test. This is how the lab sort of looks like. And you can do, currently it is all mostly done by a nasal or an oral swab done by trained phlebotomists. But I think one of the things that we will see in the future is at-home sampling, just like you do for Genome-Patri or otherwise. We have also done a lot of tests on that in our lab just to see the validity. I think currently it's not yet allowed, but I think soon it will be. So in RT-PCR, you're basically looking at primers and probes, where you have a probe that has a fluorescent dye and a quencher, and you put in a master mix of nucleotides and buffers. You put in the enzymes for the reaction initiation, and basically you're putting the temperatures up and down and make sure that because of the differences, you will be able to see a particular, because of the probe, you'll be able to find that based on the fluorescent dye, and you'll be able to find out if the virus is there. But basically, if you're looking at it from a instrument perspective, you'll start seeing if there is, you'll start looking at the graphs and be able to make out if a virus is present or not, based on a specific, which part of the region of the virus you have been looking for. So in the end, it'll tell you whether, based on the genes that you're looking at, the most popular genes being the N gene, there are also the RDRP gene, and then there are some which are screening genes like your E gene and others, but you'll basically look at those specific genes and see if they are detected or not detected, which means that whether you found the virus or you did not find the virus. But the more interesting aspects and things that we have been focused on is around prevention. So I think it is important, and when you are in the midst of a virus, to find out if you have the virus or not. It is also important to find out if you can sequence the virus and find out if there are mutations that are occurring in the virus. But I think the more important thing from an individual perspective is to find out if you can actually prevent. And prevention would mean that you would have to find out what is your genetic makeup and what you can do to be able to, basically prevent it better. So I think we talked a little bit about it in terms of, is there a susceptibility to the previous SARS? Is there a cytokine storm likelihood for this individual? And if there are comorbidities and if you have predisposition for this or not. And finally, whether there are nutrients and other drugs that you're likely to have a reaction to it or not. Now, when it comes to the SARS susceptibility and cytokine storm, I think there are quite a few genes that are responsible. I'm just picking on a couple of them that are important. And the one that you might have heard about a lot is the ACE2 gene, which is actually the place which is the receptor in the host that also the virus binds to. But there are other genes that are involved, for instance, in viral replication and immune responses, which include the MBL, IL-1, IL-18, OAS1, and so on. And then there are genes that are involved in cytokine production, regulation, and immune response, which include the TNF-alpha, the IL-10, IL-17, and so on. So I think there are several different markers that are involved in many different genes. And these are just a few examples of what you would look at over here. Now, we had always looked at things like comorbidities, whether you're looking at cardiovascular disease or high blood pressure or type 2 diabetes or other sort of autoimmune related diseases like lupus and others, where you're looking at your immune system response, your autoimmune diseases, and so on, like psoriasis and more. And then you have things like your drugs, right? When you look at things like chloroquine, which was highly talked about, for some people with a specific genetic variant, they're likely to suffer from severe adverse reactions, right? So which means that, you might take this drug thinking that you're likely to, to get better, but you would find that it is possible also to have a severe adverse effect also on it. And similarly, I think when you look at abacavir, which is an antiviral, for instance, you can also find that there might be severe drug-induced adverse effects for people if they have a certain genetic variant. And similarly, when you look at nutrient stores like zinc, vitamin C, or D, you'll find that some people are at risk for having a lower amount of these vitamins. For instance, I have a low B12 and other sort of vitamins. Also, I think a lot of Indians have low amounts of vitamin D, and part of it is also a genetic predisposition to that. So to be able to understand that and accordingly make sure that these sort of supplements are part of your lifestyle is an important aspect of immunity. And I think I just wanted to mention this, that there is a very important part of the role of mutations that are there. And we found that, today, this time, when the virus came in, we found that a lot of Indian viruses are actually there in the public domain. In the early days, when it was just started, we found barely, less than, there were 2, 3, then it went to 13, 20. And I think today there is a project called Indicove, and there are 4,338. It might have increased further as well. And we found that a lot of unique variants were also found. Now, the value of these mutations are very high. It has a very direct impact on testing as well as drugs and vaccines. We find that when you look at the genome-wide association studies of the Indian human samples, it also gives us risk assessment profiles, which is different from looking at the mutations for the virus itself. You want to make sure that when you look at the virus and you look at the mutations that are there, if the RT-PCR test and other tests that you're doing are likely to still work as the virus mutates. We also, I think, interestingly want to find out what is the origin and the mutation as they infect from people across to India, so that we can predict infection rates and severity. And I think if we can find out those human samples that have tested positive to see if there is a trend that helps us in overcoming disease. But also, I think it's important to be able to find out if there is a drug or a treatment regime that will work well in our population. Now, there are also, genomics is very valuable to find out new drug targets. And what we have found is that the spike protein is the most studied. And this has two parts, the S1 and S2. But there are many other proteins that also might have a clue for a new drug target. So I think we find that while there are 29 of them, only four of these have been used for most of them. And there are many other proteins that I think some of which will be studied more as we go along. But we'll find that a lot of new drug targets will come out by looking at the different parts of this genome of the virus and be able to find newer areas of how we can actually find new drugs, not only for this pandemic, but also for the future. The most exciting part, of course, is the fact that I think genomics has helped in coming up with new vaccines. The ones that we find that have probably are the most well-known right now are the mRNA vaccines that we hear from Pfizer and Moderna. But there are also other types of viruses, other types of vaccines that are there. And I think the fact that genomics has been a very key for coming up with vaccines this time around, I think is an important factor. And hopefully, I think this will become, once we see that these sort of vaccines become easy to produce, be able to come up with something that will be easily made as soon as a next virus or anything else hits us or another pathogen hits us. I think it will become a faster way of being able to come up with vaccines in the future. So any questions, anybody?
There are so many of them in the chat box. Would you like me to read them out to you? Because you might have to scroll up a bit.
Sure, sure. Is this on the on the chat, right?
Yes, ma'am.
1 second, let me have a look. Okay.
Would you like me to read them out to you? They start from quite a bit.
Okay, sure. Go ahead. Why don't you?
Sure, ma'am. The first question is by Savani Nagarkar. What was it written that Indian genome is complicated? What's the reason behind it?
So I think the main reason for that is the fact that I think we are made of many different. There are many different ancestries that we come from, and there are 5 key regions that we are coming from, and I think that's why I meant that we are complicated. The fact is, other fact is that we also have a lot of marriages within communities. So I think there's consanguinity in certain parts of India, but I think the more interesting thing is we come from many different regions. So understanding that is important, that where we are coming from, taking all those different parts, whether it is the Australo-Tibetan, whether it is the North Indian and South Indian, but it's also coming up. I'll try to send you all, if anybody is interested, I'll send you all some information on the ancestry parts, the genome of that. So that's what I meant by it is complicated, that it's complicated because we don't have enough data. So once you get enough data points, I think everything becomes less complicated, even though it appears that there is more data. And I think that's where we believe that because there's very less data for the Indian genome, it is sometimes hard to be able to understand whether there is, whether for certain people, whether there will be some sort of protective gene, for instance, whether there will be, there's something else that is not reacting the way it is. So I think that's why I meant that it is complicated.
Okay. Every time I hear you talk, I'm very glad that the kind of bio teachers I have known are like super good, because whether it was my 6th grade teacher or whether it's you talking about the virus, the part when you talked about the ACE2 gene, how it binds itself to the virus, it was just so good. And I'm just so glad to have people like you in my life to make me understand something so complicated this easily. Thank you very much, ma'am. So next up we have Mr. Mehfooz. He says that, say there is someone prone to alcoholism or something else, as we know, epigenetic regulation can be a big factor for gene expression. So if we change his environmental factors, do you think his alcoholism trait, which he is prone to in the future, could be changed or stopped?
Absolutely. I think there is, so I'll give an example which is close to my own family, I think. So my mom's side of the family, there is the alcoholism trait, right? Now, for many of these things, you find that there is, if you haven't even started drinking, there is not going to be that expression, right? So I think in some ways, while we do know that there are other people in the family who did start, and therefore it can have an adverse reaction, and they become alcoholic. For my mom, for instance, never even drank alcohol. And of course, I told her that, she probably shouldn't at this age. But I think one of the things is that there is, it's very important for people to know so that they can take those specific ways of being able to stop. So she has never tasted it. So I think that made it easier. I don't think that it ever expressed. But even for other people, I think what is important, for instance, is to be able to be aware of it. And I think over a period of time, I think if you can make an environmental influence on it, you'll start seeing that things like yoga, things like other things can have an influence on your gene expression, but that doesn't necessarily change your genetic code, right? So you might still have the mutation, but it might not express over there. But over a period of time, I think it becomes part of the tradition. I think we will start seeing that there is people will see the value of making these lifestyle changes, because that can ultimately have an overall effect in terms of your outcome.
I think the next question perfectly tries to cover my feelings, what I feel after this answer. Are there any internship opportunities in your organization?
I think we do have, but it's not like we have a lot. We actually grew very rapidly this year. So we doubled because of the 2 labs that we have. But you should write to, I'll send you an email. Just make sure you can write over there and see if there is an opportunity to do that.
If you take any future webinars, please let us know about the same too. We'd love to attend.
Sure.
After that, Adrian asked, which form of testing would you consider the best for COVID?
So currently the best gold standard to detect if you have the virus would be the RT-PCR. But of course, we are currently in the airport also doing RT-PCR, and we do it in 2 to 3 hours, right? So that would be but it still takes 2 to 3 hours. The other option that we are now getting in would be the point of care one. Of course, it depends on multiple factors. So for instance, I think RT-PCR, you can do 100 samples at a time. And so even though it takes 2-3 hours, you are basically doing 100 samples in that 2-3 hours time. For something like if you're doing it for an individual, if you are a doctor's office, then it probably makes sense to do a point of care thing, because then you can do one person at a time. And then something like what the Abbott test does, where you take a nasal swab, you put it in there, there is no need for having a fancy lab with PPEs and all. You just basically put that in, and in 10 minutes you get a result. So it depends on that, because the sensitivity of that test is also fairly good. So from a overall gold standard perspective, I think currently the RT-PCR test is there. There are also other tests that have come up, which are sequencing based tests. So you can look at those, but as of now, I would say that putting all the aspects of cost, time, and number of samples, I would say RT-PCR is still the better one. But I think in the next few years, we'll start seeing a lot more of point of care devices, which will have a stronger, much higher sensitivity and be able to do larger number of samples. That being said, I think there are a new tests that are coming up, which are supposed to be under $1 antigen tests, which supposedly have higher sensitivity than the ones that we find in the market today. So today, I think some of the antigen tests are quite bad. They are about 50% sensitive. So it's not very useful if you are checking to see if you are negative or not, right? It is okay to find out if you test and if you get positive, then you know you're positive. But if it's negative, it's not necessary that it is negative. So I think that's what we will start seeing. But as of now, we still are where RT-PCR is still the preferred test for travel. So most airlines will not accept anything other than an RT-PCR test. Most airports won't accept. And also, I think for hospitals also, I think when they are doing a surgery, they are still looking at an RT-PCR test. So that's what I would say is probably still the best, but I think it has to evolve to get to a point where we can do it faster, cheaper, and larger number of samples.
All right. So next up, we have Fatahul Masoom asking, does Genome Patri cover food allergy? Can I use my test results for my treatment?
It does cover some food allergies. So it covers things like lactose intolerance. It covers things like peanut allergies and a few others. But it doesn't cover specific individual pieces like, are you likely to have shrimp allergy or meat allergy or, those kind of things. So you can get overall like a broader perspective, but which basically the counselor will also tell you what you need to do to avoid some of these things. But at the same time, I think there are other tests that will tell you specific food related allergies as well. So I think this gives you a more broader perspective and a genetic perspective. But if you are getting an adverse reaction to something, it might be better to actually get a full allergy panel done as well.
Okay, so next up, we again have Pavni asking, how successful is personalized medicine so far? Like it works all the time, or only when certain hindrances come?
Sorry, I didn't get that question.
How successful is personalized medicine so far? Like it works all the time, or certain hindrance comes?
So I would say that we have gone a long way in personalized medicine, but we are not yet at the point where we have treatment for everything which is personalized, right? So I think that's where the need for getting more data comes in. We find that there are a lot of, in many cases, for instance, in cancer, it has been used extensively because it has been found that for most of cancers, each one is different. So you find that, you'll find that a lot of times they take the tissue sample, analyze that, and then see if that specific treatment is likely to work for you or not. When you look at things like, we ourselves have one profile called MedicaMap, where we look at 100 different drugs, but that doesn't cover all the drugs, right? So it covers a few drugs and it'll tell you whether you have, some of these drugs are likely to work for you based on the efficacy, or if they're going to give you an adverse reaction. But it's not yet at a point where I would say that everything is so good that we can specifically find out everything about one person's medications and otherwise. But where we have come in the last 20 years or so is that today we have a lot more data and a lot more drugs that we can understand better in terms of how well they're suited for you. And in terms of where most medications and new drugs are coming up, I think what we have started seeing is that over the last few years, in terms of the drugs that the FDA has been approving, a large majority of them have a personalized component to it, which means that earlier they would have, when we started off in 2005-06 timeframe, when we were doing some of the early submissions to the US FDA for some of our clients, which are large pharma, at that point, very, very few were doing that. Today, what we find is that most of the drugs that are being submitted would have some sort of an element of understanding of the genomics and personalized aspects of it. So I think that's the change we are seeing, but it's not yet at a point where everything has been, where we have understood every drug and we have understood it for every population.
A follow-up to this by Harshada Mali. Which method, according to you, is less risky and economically feasible?
Which method is less risky and economically feasible, is that?
Yes, ma'am.
Which method, as in for the virus, or?
I am assuming the virus, because that's what we have been talking about, apart from the data that we have gathered so far.
So in terms of less risky, I think most of the samples currently that are collected for COVID, if the question is for COVID, then I would say that most samples are still collected by the nasopharyngeal or oropharyngeal route, but there are some tests that we are seeing that are saliva based. I think that would be the least risky of all, because then all of us can give our own samples, right? And then it's a matter of just giving in some of the spit and being able to do that. So that would be less risky. And also I think because it would not need trained phlebotomists to do it, I think that would be also economically feasible. But as of now, I would say that we still have to do tests that are approved by the government. So it's still not approved in all countries. And therefore, we still use the regular nasopharyngeal and oropharyngeal to collect the samples. And then finally, in terms of whether you can run the tests, I think the cheapest way of running these tests currently, I think, would be the LAMP technique. But we find very few tests that are approved. What we find the maximum approved in terms of getting it done for a large scale is still RT-PCR. And those prices, in terms of just to understand the economics, we find that it was 5,000 rupees for the average consumer just in March in India. And we find that today, I think most state governments have brought down the price to about 800 rupees, which is, and some have even gone down to 400. So I think, which is basically a 10 times drop in pricing. So I think that would be the most economically feasible, but the least risky, I think, would be where you either get saliva or from the two, the nasal or the throat. I think the throat is easier. It could also be something that consumers can be trained to take their own samples in. But otherwise, I think the nasal is the more dangerous one, because if you're not well trained, you might hurt somebody's, hurt somebody accidentally.
Okay, so next up we have Bigger Boca. They ask, at the genomics level, why are some ethnic groups less susceptible to infection from coronavirus? For example, the Africans, if I am right.
So I think, it basically depends of over the years what has happened in a population, right? And I think that's where genomics is going to be most useful, to be able to look at it from population level and see if there are some protective mechanisms that we have in the underlying, in the genes, maybe because of previous, previous sort of infections over the years, and therefore the survival, right? I think this is the Darwin conference. So I think that sort of explains. So that is a possibility that we see that it is there. We also have found that, for instance, in some ethnic populations, you find that some diseases are more prevalent than the others. And that's also because of years of evolution that is there. So I would say that we are still at a point where they are doing a large scale studies on many different populations. But, and I think that's the purpose of it. There are many collaborations that are being done across the globe, some of which are basically trying to study that. So you're trying to look at the host, which means that different population wise, whether it is Indian, Africans, Caucasian and others, to study if there is something in our genes that is making us more or less susceptible. And I gave you all some examples of, for instance, ACE2 receptors and others that are there. What we will study in different populations is to find out if the one is in terms of how much number of, I'm trying to get the right word right now, but basically you're trying to find out if different populations have different susceptibility to different things. And part of it could be, part of it is basically survival over the years, but part of it is just that those mutations that have survived because you had to go through certain sort of other infections in the past. And that sort of made that set of people become a lot more, robust to not getting these sort of infections. I'm not getting the right word for that, but if you understood what I was trying to explain to you all. Okay.
We had one question by Siddesh. What is the cost of precision medicine in India?
So I think there are different things that are there when you're looking at precision medicine. There could be for an individual condition, or it could be for the whole genome. So, like I was explaining, I think you could do it for one RT-PCR reaction, right? So you could maybe say that I want to find out if there is one marker for this particular disease, and I want to find out if I'm susceptible or not. Those could be as low as a few hundred rupees, right? It could be 1,000 rupees, so about $10. But if you are looking at doing, let's say, a genotyping platform like a Genome Patri or a Medica Map, then it's about 7,000 to 10,000 rupees, right? So that's about, $100, right? And then if you're looking at saying that I want to find out a lot more, I want to do this for cancer for a specific patient who's sick, then you're looking at getting tissue samples for that patient and then being able to run, maybe even do a whole genome sequencing, in which case it will be closer to $1,000. So I think it all depends on what you mean by precision medicine and what you're specifically looking at. Are you looking at something that you already know for? I mean, if you're looking for a specific mutation that you are already aware of, or you're trying to find something that you're not aware of and then compare it with other databases that are there. So I think it ranges from $10 to 1,000 or a little bit more than that. but that would be approximately the range. But it all depends on whether it's a single marker versus multiple markers, the known versus the unknown.
Okay, so next up we have Unnati Paralia. She asked, viruses are notorious for antigenic shift and antigenic drift mechanisms. So will it have any influence towards the protective immunity conferred by the vaccine?
Yeah, I think that is part of the reason why we are constantly doing a genomic analysis of the different viruses that we have to find out if there is a, so for instance, the the flu virus, right? It mutates every year, and therefore you need a different vaccine every single year. That's a possibility for this as well, but we have not yet seen that for the coronavirus. It is evolving very slowly, which is a good sign. So I think the number of compared to the flu, I think this is evolving much slowly. I think I'm trying to remember the exact numbers, but it is, I think if I remember it correctly, it was the mutation that we are finding is once in every 2 weeks, something like that. I'll send you all the link. But compared to the regular flu vaccine, which is flu virus, which is mutating much faster, and we find it at least a year, I would say that this one's a lot slower, which is good news for us. But if it does, then we will find that, we would have to find slightly different mechanisms for or changing the vaccine on a regular basis. So it's a possibility that we might find this, nagging us over the years, but hopefully not.
Right. Guys, we will be taking 5 more minutes of the question answer session. So in case you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box.
I saw one which was on ancestry over here.
Ancestry.
I can't find it anymore, but I think someone asked a question on how do you find the ancestry? What is the technique or something? But it's done in the same way. So if somebody wants to find out the ancestry, the technique that you would use is you would you basically get a sample from saliva or blood or wherever, and you extract your DNA. And let's say you do genotyping and you get large number of markers for that. You would then run it against an algorithm. So you can do 2 different things. One is to find out specific markers that are there for specific regions. The other is to find out the population wide, how much population of Caucasian versus different clusters of groups that you find over there. And as a result, we come up with ways of saying ethnic composition for a particular individual, and I'll tell you based on the clusters that have been created. So for instance, some companies would just tell you that you are South Asian. Some companies would tell you that, you are, for us, for instance, our classification will go down to East India, West India, and others, because you have a lot more data for the Indian genome, for instance. So I think it all depends on that.
Okay, so we have 2 more questions. One by Vikram Rawat. What influences the likelihood of false positive or false negative diagnostic tests?
So I would say that, when you look at, for instance, I was giving you all an example of the antigen test, which is a rapid test. Now, in that test, for instance, the specificity is high. So which means that if you do get a, if they say you are positive, then it's likely that you are positive. But if they say you are negative, it doesn't mean you are negative, right? So you're supposed to actually technically do a second test to make sure that you rule out the fact that you are not negative, that you are not actually positive. So you would do a rapid antigen test, and then all the people who are negative, you have to do it with an RT-PCR test. So I think one is that if you have a test like that, there's a possibility that the people who then think that they are negative go back and possibly spread the virus. So that is one problem that can be there. The second thing that could occur, for instance, is that you get a false positive, right? And when you get a false positive, which means that you are isolating an individual who might not have the virus at all. So that has social implications. And then once their period of infection is over, if they go back into let's say, thinking that they already have antibodies because they've been subjected to this, it's possible that they will still get infected. So I think those are the influences of getting wrong results. So it's always a good thing to, one, make sure that if there is a false positive, to verify it with an antibody test so that you know that you actually have antibodies against it. So you will be sure that you actually were infected. The second is that if you do get a false negative from tests that are not very sensitive, then it's important to get a second test so that you don't have that problem again. Okay.
All right. That are all the questions that we're taking today. Thank you so much, ma'am. Like I said, some features stay with me throughout my life, and this is the one session that I will definitely count in one of those, because I don't think somebody has ever simplified biology and such complicated biology for me this much to this level. And I'm just really grateful to you for it. Thank you so much for coming today, ma'am.
You're welcome. And those who want to read, I actually have written it in even more basic terms. Please do go and see our blog. We've tried to make it easy for everybody to read. So we'd be happy if there are specific topics, we'd be happy to break them down for you all and make it easier to understand.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. That was a great session, a great start to the morning. So again, I have one small reminder: yesterday's social media contest of covering all the 3 days. Today, it was yesterday, today, and tomorrow, because it's Darwin 2020 and its first virtual edition, and the winners get to win exciting exclusive Darwin stickers. So please participate. And now we will have a small poll for your feedback.